Welcome, everybody, to today's episode. Thanks for joining us on the Parkway Powerful Ideas podcast. I am Christian, and I'm joined by Todd and Michael. We're all a part of the Parkway team. And for those of you that don't know, Parkway is an audio-visual integrator. We do a lot more than that, but we're an audio-visual integrator in West Michigan. And we have a special guest today on the podcast that I am so excited to announce. This person has really influenced me in what I do, specifically in audio. And I'm so excited to have him on the podcast today. We have Dave Stagl, who's audio engineer on the podcast. Now, I have a few notes here, Dave, on your accomplishments.
So, okay.
So Dave,
maybe I should be taking notes on these because I can never remember them.
Here, let me remind you.
That long of a list. Wow.
So Dave, you've been involved in the world of audio production for the last 25 years or so. He was the audio director of North Point Church in Atlanta, Georgia, for about 10 years. That's Andy Stanley's church down in Atlanta, which I've toured. They're doing great stuff down there. And you've been a staple to the church audio community for a really, really long time. I know since I've been into church audio, your name has been synonymous with me learning. You know, I've known about you from
That's
afar,
cool.
And then I got to meet you, and then I got to visit you, and then you gave us a tour of the facility, and somehow I ended up with your cell phone number, and I would text you, and you would actually reply. And so thanks for doing that, number one. But you've been a staple. You're also the owner of Stagl Productions, where you do both live audio mixing, and you also do studio audio work as well. And you can also be found at goingto11.com, where you have a lot of blog posts, which I have read, that have been very helpful, whether it's either for live audio or for studio audio and plugins and that sort of thing. So Dave Stagl, welcome to the Powerful Ideas podcast. Thanks for joining us, man.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I've been looking forward to this episode for a while now. And so, but Dave, before we jump into all the questions we want to ask and, kind of dive into that, I would love to hear, and our audience would love to hear also about maybe your history. How did you get into audio? You know, what were the first steps, and what kind of started you on your path?
Well, how far back do you want me to go?
The beginning, baby.
How far back do you remember?
Diapers.
Yeah, diapers. Well, I had a Neve console when I was in my the audio thing for me probably started in high school, and originally I wanted to make movies, and I was a film major in college. In high school, the closest I could get at the time, without dating myself too much, was working on theater stuff. So I went in to work on shows, and I wanted to do lighting. And then I found out that to do lighting, you had to go up really high. And someone told me, they said, you don't have a fear of heights, you respect heights. And I really respect heights quite a bit. So I ended up doing audio, and it just turned out to be something that I loved. And when I got to film school in college, since I was the only one with, quote unquote audio experience from high school theater, everybody kind of started pushing me more to do audio stuff. And probably about somewhere in my sophomore year, junior year, I finally went, okay, I get it. And I just focused on that. I was a film major. I started taking a lot of music technology classes, and I think my junior year of college, I started an internship in a studio. I did that for 6 months. And when that kind of ended, I started editing audio as a part-time job during my senior year. And when I got out of school, I was doing kind of audio post-production stuff, and did that for, 5 or 6 years. And then that was probably right after that, I started getting into the church. And that was, I want to say, maybe it was 2004 when I started working in the church. And then it's a blur. since then.
Got a whole
So
thing.
Yeah.
And then it was
blur.
2020 for 15 years.
Seriously.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was on staff at a church outside of Chicago because I'm originally from Chicago, and I was there for a couple of years, I guess. And then we moved down to Atlanta where I could be the audio director at North Point Community Church, and did that for a while. And then I went independent. I still do a lot of work with North Point Ministries and some of their different campuses and other churches all around the country now. So
That's
it's fun.
awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, very, very cool. I'm glad that you're still kind of in the industry and still doing it, you know. A lot of people, when they leave kind of the audio tech world, sometimes they change industries when they go from church back to, like, you know, whatever it is that they're going to do in the future.
I wouldn't even know what else to do at this point.
I know,
That's the
right?
problem.
Crazy. But all right, well, I'm going to do a little bit of a sandwich move here. So we started with the history, right? Where you came from.
Mhm.
But how has COVID been for you, man? You know, obviously it's affected the entertainment industry. It's affected the church industry. Anything that's kind of live and where large groups are gathering has been impacted. So how has your 2020 been, and what have you experienced over the last, I don't know, I guess 9 months?
It's been different, but I've kind of, the last kind of 5 years or so, 5, 6 years since I went kind of independent full time with my own company, that in itself has been kind of a roller coaster ride. So this was just like another hill basically on that. The big way it affected me is a part of my business is going around and doing a lot of on-site training with churches and doing stuff one-on-one. And that really, I mean, it almost completely disappeared. I think I had two site visits this year that I can remember. Maybe there was one in the first quarter. But I don't feel like there was. I've only been on a couple of planes this year, which isn't doing anything for my frequent flyer status, unfortunately. Or
Yeah, you don't wanna
hotels,
use
rental
it
cars.
now anyway.
No, you don't want to lose
Yeah.
any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's definitely impacted that. I'm not doing as much front of house work, obviously. Although a little bit in the last few months, some of that has kind of come back a little bit for me with the church side of things. Most of what I've been doing though this year is been living in my studio, and I've really been enjoying doing that.
So what is
Yeah.
it that you're mostly doing in your studio? Is it because a lot of churches went from doing live work to doing
Mhm.
live streaming. Even the
Yeah.
ones that kind of had like a mediocre live
Mhm.
stream, they started to really kind of, get that a little bit more robust. And so have people been reaching out to you to kind of do some post-production work on for their streams, like pre-recorded stuff?
Yeah, I've done a bunch of that. I'd love to do more. If people out there are looking for help with stuff like that, I'd definitely love to help with that. So it's a lot of pre-recorded stuff. I've also been going out on site and doing some of the capture and doing a lot of the recording. Like I do a lot of that with Decatur City Church here in Atlanta, and they're one of North Point Ministries campuses. So I've got a lot of friends there who I've been working with for 15, 16 years now. And those have been a lot of fun. And I've been really happy with the way a lot of that stuff has been coming out. There's a series that they've been releasing called Songs from an Empty Sanctuary, where we just go in and we're just recording musicians doing songs. And I think we recorded 300 Christmas songs
Oh, wow.
for it this year.
Wow.
Maybe not quite that much, but it sure felt like there were a lot.
I didn't know there was that many.
I think, I'm sure there are.
They only play like 20 over and over again,
That's
though.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's the songwriters I know, that's mailbox money for them every year. If you can get a good Christmas song hit, that just comes back around every single year. Can't go wrong with that. So
Yeah, Mariah's not complaining.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And she's back on the charts again. I just saw that this morning. So
Every year she's on the charts.
I can't
Yeah.
listen to her.
Yeah.
but we've been doing a bunch of that stuff and then recording stuff for kind of their other online events, and it's online services and all sorts of things. And I've been doing audio post-production since the beginning of my career, so I've continued to do that, and
Very
just
cool.
video projects and things like that. So
Well, that's awesome. Thanks for diving into that, man.
mm-hmm.
So a couple of questions I want to ask you that are just kind of fun, just to get like the ball rolling a little
Okay.
bit. Okay. Because this is like the first official just like audio conversation podcast that isn't kind of connected to a manufacturer, so to speak.
Right.
We've talked about speakers, we've talked about.
Really?
I
Well,
think so.
I think so. We
I
haven't
think
done any
so.
audio.
And just
We-
like
Do we know
interviewing an
anything
audio
about that?
engineer.
We had Ragsdale on, but we talked about
Yeah.
the live event industry.
Right.
That's
That's what we
COVID.
talked about.
Yeah.
Right.
We didn't even talk mixing with him.
Exactly. So we're gonna loop back around and get him back on.
Yeah.
So
That's part two.
we're getting a double whammy with him. But what are some of your favorite artists or albums that have inspired you? I mean, like tried and true, you always go back to them, whether it's for referencing a mix or whether it's just to inspire and get you back to the love of what you do.
Boy, that's a good question. I was not expecting that. Nobody ever wants to know that kind of stuff. Well, there's two sides to the music thing for me. There's the stuff I listen to for enjoyment, and then there's stuff that I listen to kind of professionally. I think for professional inspiration, I have like a lot of Spotify playlists of different engineers' work. And I will go to stuff from, like, I have a playlist for Bob Clearmountain. I have one for Chris Lord-Alge, Tom Lord-Alge, Mike Shipley, Andy Wallace.
Nice.
I'd have to pull up the app, and I could see there's probably Justin Niebank is another one. Those are all guys who have probably influenced me quite a bit over the years. But
don't
for
have one,
fun,
you don't have one for Manny American?
no, I do.
Yeah, you do, baby.
I got one for Manny American. I've got one for Serban Genna in
Love it.
there. Randy Staub. I mean, it's like I'll go and listen to Elliot Shiner. Elliot Shiner's big influence on me. But like the big engineers who probably influenced me the most is probably Bob Clearmountain, the Lord-Alge brothers.
Oh yeah.
So good.
Andy Wallace, and maybe Elliot Shiner, or I don't know that Elliot Shiner influenced me as much as I probably kind of gravitate towards some of the stuff he does. Like he's more to me kind of like he's like the engineer's engineer.
Yeah.
I don't know any better way to
Just more
say
technical.
that. So
Yeah.
well, but not necessarily. It's just more, I don't know, more hi-fi. I mean, he did a lot of the Steely Dan stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there's a Toto record that he did that somebody turned me on to years ago.
Oh, you shouldn't have brought that up.
And there's a track on that, like people if I've tuned a PA, anybody who has brought me in to evaluate a system or tweak a PA or tune it, they have probably heard that song enough to never ever want to
Mm-hmm.
hear
we're
that
with
stuff
you
again.
Toto song?
Yeah, we're with you.
I will remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we
Do
all
that. I
use
use
We all
Turning
use it.
Point. It's
That's my first one.
Now I'm gonna have to
I know,
I'm gonna have to pull
I'm
up
getting sick
my
of it now.
No.
my thing. But
No.
for like mix references, Brian Adams' Reckless is one that I go back
nice.
to all the time, that Clear Mountain mixed. I'd have to pull stuff up. I mean, a lot of times when I'm referencing stuff these days, I'm pulling up stuff that is current, that like my clients are listening to.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So
That was my next question, actually.
Yeah, so with like the modern worship stuff, I'm pulling up a lot of Elevation stuff, and sometimes Passion, the Bethel stuff I listen to a lot of times, just to kind of compare and see how my stuff is with theirs. So Sam Gibson is one of he's been mixing a lot of stuff. Sean Moffat, those are two of the guys who I check out their stuff a lot, just to kind of see what are people doing these days.
Yeah, it's always important to stay in tune with what's happening. For example, like the church music in general, I would say music in general, but it's really impacted the church. Back in the day, it was like there was like two genres of music for a church. You're either like traditional or you were like
back in my day.
yeah, back in your day.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, that even extended to like the late 90s, early 2000s, it was like it was rock and roll, but you didn't really have like a lot of EDM, a lot of hip hop incorporated into worship.
No.
Where nowadays it's like no
Anything.
brainer. Yeah, anything goes, and so Young and Free, whether it's the crate tracks or propaganda, different things of that nature. So there's a lot of hip hop influence in just music generally today. A lot of 808s, things of that nature. And so being able to mix those properly, you have to have a reference, right?
Yeah, to a certain extent. Part of the thing for me is, while I want the stuff I'm doing to compete, I guess you could say, and I don't even know if compete's really the right word, but to just kind of stand up with what's going on. I think, you always want to have work that doesn't sound like it's out of left field. But at the same time, if it all sounds exactly the same, it's not going to make an impact. It's, looking back at music history for the last 20, 30, 40 years, the artists that stand out are not the ones that sound like everybody else. If I think about,
Sure.
just in my lifetime, the whole grunge era hit right into high school, early college.
Yeah.
You had the bands that were kind of at the forefront, and then you had the kind of, I don't know that I would call them copycats, because they weren't well, and I don't know that they were necessarily trying to imitate it. It was just all kind of in that thing that was happening at the time, and the ones who got there first are the ones that we usually know about versus everyone else. Or even just thinking, a little more recently, I guess, although it's starting to get dated, but Adele. When Adele hit, when Rolling in the Deep came out, there wasn't anything else that sounded like that at the time. And to me, it sounded like kind of a throwback sort of tune, but compared to everything else that was happening, that was pretty different. And I think it was the same thing with
modern. It still felt modern, even though it was, it was like a throwback track, right?
Mm-hmm. But it's the same with like when Passion started getting big. I mean, who else was doing that kind of stuff?
Mumford is a great example too.
Yeah,
Mumford
there's another one.
Another one, yeah.
Sure.
But that's a tough thing, I think, for people in general when they're doing music, because thinking back to when I was a singer-songwriter, it was like, yeah, I want to kind of do what other people are doing right now. You're not always necessarily thinking about breaking ground. So it's hard to kind of find a balance between, hey, I want to be current, but at the same time not trying to copy. How do you advance things and make it sound modern and stuff like that? So I don't get too hung up on, does my stuff sound exactly like what's going on? But at the same time, it's the stuff I'm working on is stuff for clients. These aren't my projects, they're their projects. So, it's really, it's like, what is their vision, and trying to figure out, how do I achieve their vision and make them happy? Because they're the ones who have to live with it. When I finish the thing and send it off, I'm going to move on to the next thing. But for somebody else, I mean, that's their baby.
Right.
So,
well, bouncing off of that, I mean, how do you ensure that the work that you're doing meets the expectations of your client, whether that's a church or, some video company or whatever project you're working on? Do you have things in place to kind of double check, triple check, questions you ask before you start the project? How do you kind of clarify what the win is?
Yeah, it's really case by case, because I always get on the phone with people ahead of time, and I can usually get a good sense just from having a conversation with them of what they're going for. And, a lot of times they will just mention references right off the bat. And that helps. Sometimes I'll have to ask questions on things. And then part of it too is it's not for me, when I'm doing a mix for somebody, it's not a one and done kind of process. My background is, before I was doing this remotely, it was all in person. It was the same thing with live sound. There's always somebody there who's going to give you feedback. So I'll kind of get my take on something and send it off to them, and then I get notes back and start changing stuff. And I'm usually not that far off. I mean, it might be 2 or 3 rounds of changes with some people sometimes. A lot of my clients, sometimes they take the first one. Sometimes they take the first one, and I'd rather that they had some changes on it. Because I was like hoping that they're going to help finish it. So, it's a collaborative kind of thing for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I find that to be true in our experience, right, as well, is that it's very much collaborative, right? We're not on our own island and trying to change the vision of said client, said person on stage as audio engineers. We're always trying to collaborate, and we're almost a support to them, but an important piece of support, right?
Well, it's the same
It's
in the
all
church.
support.
Yeah, it's the same in the church when you're doing live sound. You do run a Sunday, and that's one and done, but you do get to do it again.
Yeah.
But
Well,
the refinement process is done with the team and submitting to leadership and what they're going for.
and those ones that take more time, more effort, sometimes I shouldn't say annoying, but at the time they seem that way. You got to go through a number of, it's more difficult to find their sweet spot or whatever.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you complete those projects, those are typically the most rewarding.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. It's kind of like going through the fire, and you're just kind of doing this, and iron sharpens iron, and then you get this incredible.
So when
product.
you send out one take, like you say, and they say, "Oh, that's great," you're kind of like, "Really?
Oh, that's it?"
Well,
Really?
sometimes I'm perfectly glad. Like everything I send out, it's done.
For me, it's
not.
I am.
How many? Wait, I got a question for you, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
How many revisions have you done for one song? Like, what's the record? I'm just really curious.
Don't say.
I don't know, maybe three or 4.
Yeah, nice.
Well, that's pretty good.
Not bad.
I mean, one of the things I think that is different for me at this stage in my career is most people who are coming to me and hiring me on stuff, they've heard something I've did, or they know reputation wise, and they're trying to get that in the first place. So that kind of changes things for me anyways. There's a weird thing with just, I think, perception that people have of stuff. And sometimes, like I remember I was in a church gig, and I was standing next to somebody, probably one of my volunteers. They were mixing, and everything was fine. And I walked out, and the next service, I was not standing next to him at front of house. And I got a note back like, "Hey, what happened at the second service? Why didn't it sound as good?" And I was like, what do you mean? And I went back to the recording, and, from the first one to the second one, there wasn't any change. The only difference was I wasn't standing next to him.
Yeah.
So that's one of the
perception.
It's a real thing in audio. And I kind of feel like sometimes I go into places and people, they're putting it through a lens for me that, oh, it's me. While I'm sitting here going, you can give me real feedback on this. Like, I don't hit it out of the park every time.
Yeah. They're like, "Oh my gosh, it's you." And you're like,
I'm like,
it's just me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you. No, the reason I ask that is because, you hear some stories about like songs, like depending on the artist, having to be mixed like 12 times. And like brought in like 3 or 4 different engineers because it just wasn't hitting the right way. The low end just wasn't right, or this just wasn't just right, And so sometimes you hear those stories, and so I was just interested in finding out. But that's good to hear that.
Yeah.
3-4 shots, boom, you got what you need.
Well, I think some of it too, some of it really is about expectations and setting expectations and understanding expectations. I think that's a big source of frustration for people, and one of the chief causes in a lot of things. When I'm out training guys, one of the big sources of frustrations that I see with the audio guys, or the tech team and production guys, sometimes their expectations are different from where leadership's expectations are. So you've got a team out there and they're like killing themselves to do something. And meanwhile, the senior pastor, he doesn't want those guys to kill themselves. Like the bar that they're trying to achieve is way higher than what he's looking
Yeah.
for.
Sure.
Right.
And sometimes though that can go the other way, where, if you're not pushing your production guys hard enough, and if you do have a lower bar, you can end up frustrating them, because most production guys I know, they want to be killing it at everything. So when they're in a situation where they can't succeed or don't feel like they can succeed quite to the level they want to, they end up frustrated from that too. So it goes kind of both ways. But for me, with working with clients, it's real important for me to get expectations from them on what they're looking for, and for me to kind of set expectations for them, like on delivering notes and things to me, because that tends to smooth out the process a whole lot more, and it just helps get everybody on the same page so that you can work together and have fun. Because I mean, this stuff should be fun. I think
It is
it's not
fun.
like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So I had a client that said, we want to sound like so-and-so church down the road. And it's like, well, you're not that church. You have to change those expectations, because first of all, you have all volunteers on your music staff, and they have all paid musicians,
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
And
paid doesn't mean good, but they do it for a living,
no, it doesn't.
I love it. It's true.
But point is a completely different personality.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying, Dave, like we're all inspired by somebody. I have those playlists just like you. I have my favorite albums, everybody, we're all influenced by somebody, but you want to have your own signature.
So what was the music you listened to for pleasure?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't hear the second part of that question.
Did we get to that? Okay.
I've been waiting all through this whole.
Well, I'm a big I'm a big Springsteen fan.
Yeah.
U2.
Of course.
Yes.
And then I listen to a lot of kind of alternative stuff, I guess. I'll every once in a while pull up Spotify, like a playlist of what's going on in alternative, and I'll start listening to that. I like the stuff that Royal Blood's been doing.
Dope. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing But Thieves, some of that stuff. And then there's all kinds of, nostalgia sort of stuff that I listen to now, stuff from high school and college. I'll go back to that stuff too. But
like Informer by Snow. Yeah, I got you.
The 10 album.
That was never my thing, but
no, 10 Pearl Jam.
You gotta listen to
10.
Yeah, Pearl Jam. I'm a Pearl Jam
times a
fan.
year.
Yeah.
So
some old Soundgarden stuff.
Yeah.
You know who stuck out in that era, and it was because they didn't actually copy what everybody else was doing, was somebody like a Blind Melon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like they were able to find like their own little niche a little bit, because they were kind of a little bit to the left or right. They weren't exactly what everybody else was trying to do. So
yeah, it was just a unique front man.
Yeah, he was very unique. Yeah.
Same with like Alice in Chains had their own sound.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they tuned down a half step, which made them sound even more depressing. So
absolutely. Yeah, man. So Michael and I were always geeking on stuff like that. We listen to a lot of vinyl and
that's cool.
Posting about it and all that kind of stuff. So are you much of a vinyl guy, Dave?
I have a modest vinyl collection. I wouldn't say I'm a vinyl guy, but I have, I've got a stack of records.
Okay, nice.
Somewhat. I went through, I can't remember when it was. Maybe it was 5 or 6 years ago when vinyl was starting to get popular again. A friend of mine, like I hadn't listened to anything on vinyl since high school, because when we had records in high school, like we couldn't get away from them fast enough because they skipped and they popped and they clicked. I mean, we hated that. It was not, vinyl was not this amazing thing to us back in the early 90s.
I'm in that same boat.
Yeah.
So, when CDs came around, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so much better than cassettes, and this is so much better than the scratchy records. And yes, please sign us up. So a few years ago, someone gave me a record player. A good friend of mine had one laying around, and I went out and I picked up Rumors, and
Nice.
That's a good one.
Great one.
and I think I picked up Thriller, because I used to have Thriller on vinyl and I couldn't find my copy of it. I definitely didn't have it, and I can't find it at my parents' house either. So picked those two up, and I sat in my home theater, and I had the CD of Rumors on and the vinyl, and I flipped back and forth to see which one I preferred. And I liked the vinyl a little bit better, but it wasn't like night and day. I mean, vinyl's not perfect.
No, it's not.
I think
that's the
there's a
whole idea,
misconception.
right?
There's a
Yeah.
misconception, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, but I started listening to it for a while because the limiting that was going on with CDs, I was not hearing that the same on the vinyl. So some of the rock stuff was punchier and
Yeah.
just wasn't crushed quite as much. And that was, to me, that was more why I was preferring vinyl. But it's just really hard for me to sit down and listen to stuff. I mean, most of the times I'm actually going to sit and get to listen to something is because I just got on a plane and I have nothing else to do, or I'm in the car. I don't sit and just listen to vinyl that much, although it's on like my list to do right now because it's been a while since I've put anything on.
I never thought, how do you do that?
What's
How
that?
many kids do you have?
I have 3 kids.
When do you ever have time to sit by yourself and listen to vinyl?
Well, we work from home a lot nowadays.
Well,
So I've
yeah,
been
I know
able to
that
go through a lot of
the
my
key
collection.
there was working from home.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I lock the door. They know not to bother me.
Okay.
No, some of my vinyl is the old jazz. Like that sounds very good on vinyl. Some of the old Miles Davis and Coltrane and
Sure.
I
actually don't have any of that, man.
Donald Byrd is fantastic.
We're kind of running off on a tangent here.
Yeah.
No, I love it though. I mean,
Well, it isn't.
This is the thing. This is the thing is, obviously Dave's an audio engineer. So this episode is focused on audio. And whenever I do audio training, the first hour minimum, maybe hour and a half, all I do is listen to music with the teams that I am training.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you don't listen to music, this is not for you.
Yeah.
Like, you need to be a listener of music. You need to know what music feels like and sounds like and where it's going and how to follow a band, and because you're an integral part of that process. And so I'm always interested to hear, like, for me, guilty pleasure is going to be the last thing we talk about before we dive into actual mixing stuff. But like for me, whenever I leave a gig or a church or something that I just mixed, or maybe I was in the mixing at home for a client, and I get in the car, it's either going to be silence, or for me, it's going to be easy listening. Easy listening is my guilty pleasure. Like, I'm going to, Lionel Richie, whatever the case is, something soft that is great.
Who?
Yeah. But it allows me to just kind of relax a little bit, and just kind of, but it's not just like relaxing emotionally. It's like my ears, everything. It just kind of like brings everything down a notch. What are your guys' guilty pleasure? If you had to pick something, like one thing where you're like, man, I really don't want people to know about this, but this is my guilty pleasure as far as music goes.
Oh boy.
Talk radio.
Talk radio?
Really?
It relaxes me.
Okay.
It does, because I'm not working. It's like,
Yeah.
if I listen to music, I'm sitting there analyzing it usually, and I have to. That's why I like the jazz, because I can kind of set that in the background and let that play, and I enjoy it.
Yeah.
While I can do my computer work and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm not sitting there analyzing it.
Sure.
you know.
Sure.
But talk radio lets me relax. Like every time I mix the show, it's like I drive home listening to talk radio.
That's awesome. I love it. Todd?
I can't multitask. I'm just going to be honest. Anything that distracts my attention.
Yeah.
Like I listen to Michael. He's right across the hall from me, his office. And all the time he's listening to music. And I can't do it. If I'm working, I just have to focus everything on that. So I don't listen. I listen to a lot of music, but my guilty pleasure is
on your boat.
I'm just completely opposite from you. So it's crank it up, let it hammer.
Boom.
Yeah.
All right. I love it.
I got really hooked. Well, not hooked. I shouldn't say hooked. That's not good. But anyway, I listened to when we were during our time at home, when we were at home working for a period of time.
Yeah.
I'd sit at night when I was done working and I watched old videos from concert videos. And I really got stuck on Eddie Van Halen. I watched a lot of stuff. And then when he passed, I watched a lot of documentaries from him and stuff he was talking about and doing. I'm kind of a guitar guy anyway. Always wanted to be that guy, as a kid. So never got there.
Dude, I love that. I didn't know that about you. That's great.
I love loud screaming guitars.
Yes.
It's
nice. Yes. That's what I work out to.
Me,
Dave, guilty pleasure, man.
I don't know if I have a guilty pleasure.
You don't have to feel guilty about it.
No, you don't have to feel guilty, but something that you wouldn't be bragging to all your boys about, like, yo, man, I just love this.
Oh, well, I've been listening to a lot of Roxette again lately.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Maybe that's.
All right. I love it.
That's probably the closest thing, but I would have loved to have mixed her before she passed.
Yeah. Well, cool. All right. Well, let's change gears a little bit, just talking a little bit about just audio in general. I'm actually going to dive ahead a little bit. So a lot of the stuff that we do involves drums, right? And I really feel like if you get your drums right, you get your low end right, you get your bass right, it's really hard to mess up a mix. Still very possible. But all that to say is when you're approaching drums in general, Dave, whether it's in the studio or live, you can kind of go back and forth in between these. But just to educate us a little bit on your approach. I don't want to know about anybody else's approach, maybe things that you learn from other people, but kind of what's your way of approaching drums? And I'm talking holistically, whether it's mics that you use, the processing that you use, where you place the microphones in order to get the sound that you're going for. What's kind of your approach to drums in general? Like a starting point.
I'm not super picky about microphones probably in general. If I was, I'd probably own my own and take them around, but I usually just use what's there. Although I do like a 57 on the snare. That's my, and people give me a hard time about it, but usually when I change, I'll go into churches and they've got, whatever the flavor of the month is on there. And I'll ask them, hey, do you just have a 57? And I'll swap it out. And they're like, oh, that's what we've been that's what we wanted. And it's like, well,
yeah,
and you can, and that's not, it's not the end all be all, but it's just for me, I know how to get my snare sound or the snare, like the way I think the snare, like that snare should be in the mix. I know how to get that out of a 57 because I've just been using them for a long time.
Yeah, you know what you're gonna get.
It's just a prejudice we all have, though, right?
Right.
If I go in to do a church and they say, well, what speaker would you recommend? I'm going to go back to one that I know I've had a ton of success with, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, a lot of, and that's the thing with a lot of gear. It really is kind of a Coke versus Pepsi, do you like guitars? I own Telecasters, but some people prefer Les Pauls. It's just, what is your taste? It's not necessarily that one thing is good or better than the other. A lot of times we mistake taste for quality, and that's not, if you listen to enough records, I mean, there's the window of what is good is a lot wider than I think a lot of people really want to acknowledge.
I agree.
There
So
certainly
good
is a
statement.
lot of good gear out there these days.
Yeah.
yeah,
more than
there's a
ever
lot
used
of good stuff. Like consoles these days, and not to go too far off on a tangent, but most of the time the stuff that I find that bothers me on consoles, it has nothing to do with the way they sound. It's just it relates more to the workflow of things, or how do the faders feel? Like, are they smooth or do they stick? Or it's that kind of stuff. That's the stuff that really kind of irks me, and that I will complain to manufacturers reps about.
We're gonna get to that one.
Yes,
aren't
we
we?
are.
So
Back to drums.
Back to
so
drums.
back to drums.
So yeah, 57. Pretty
57, and then I'm real. Mic placement is real big for me. That's one of the main things I learned when I was a studio engineer, was how big of a difference that mic placement makes on things. And a lot of times when I'm going in and training and we're using tracks, sometimes the first comment out of my mouth is, I would like to move the microphone on this, but I can't. So when we get the band back in here, I'm going to go and do that. In the meantime, I'll work with whatever is there. I mean, that's, when I'm mixing stuff in the studio, it just comes into me. I don't have a say a lot of the time on what microphone was recorded and how did they do it. So that's probably part of why I don't get too hung up on that stuff as much, because I've gotten things in that were done so many different ways and I can make it work. So,
well, going back to your days as the audio director at North Point, like tell us a little bit about that, like kind of like what your direction on that was. And I know you tried a lot of different things and you would blog about it.
yeah.
Oh, I tried this time, but I kind of went back to this next time, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing for engineers to go through. You have to kind of experiment and find your taste. I mean, if I was buying drum microphones today, kick drum, I'd probably do like a Beta 91 and a Beta 52 in the kick. And by the way, I'm probably biased towards Shure products because I'm from Chicago and they're based in Chicago. That doesn't hurt. I've also had really good support from them over the years.
Shout out to Shure. Sure, shout out.
So I
to
do
Shure.
like Shure stuff.
Like they need it.
You can,
yeah,
But
like
yeah,
they
I
need the shout out.
Yeah, right. Well, it all helps.
Yeah,
I have no endorsement with Shure, by the way. The 57 I actually like the Beta 57 a little better on snare top. I like Beta 98s on toms. If money was no object though, I would put 414s on the toms. That's something I really have enjoyed quite a bit. Beyond that, maybe pencil condensers for the cymbals or overheads.
You like to under mic or over?
No, I've tried under miking. I'm not crazy about it. If I have to do it because, in a live setting, sometimes people want the aesthetic of not having mics up, which I don't get because I think microphones are sexy, but I'm a little biased
Agreed.
on that.
Same with big black speakers. They're just
right,
awesome.
exactly. Why would you want to hide? Why do you want to
Whether
hide that
or
stuff?
not,
It's wonderful.
Yes.
You should put a light on that. I mean,
Instead
why
of
are we
a
hiding
cross,
this?
you should have a big black speaker.
Yeah.
You see that big stack of Marshalls back in the day? They actually had all them on. No.
Well,
Hey,
got a band.
someday.
So,
The Beatles did. Sorry, those were Vox.
You still couldn't hear the Beatles.
Yeah.
no.
Those Screaming Girls.
That's true.
Tangent.
You know what? Funny story. My wife, as a teenager, she loved NSYNC, right? Loved NSYNC. Went to an NSYNC show. Couldn't hear the show because of all the screaming girls. It was like the worst experience of her life. Sorry, Dave. You were
Sorry about
saying?
that.
No, that's fine. What was I talking?
That-
Oh,
back to
overheads.
that guitar player.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like
Always
under miking stuff
I
because
don't either.
it's not how we listen to this stuff.
Exactly.
Really. If you
Yeah.
I went in somewhere and they had one mic for the snare and it was under the snare, and I said, why is that underneath? And then they were like, well, why aren't you supposed to? I said, well, can we put it on top? And they said, why would you put it on top? I said, do you ever listen to the snare drum underneath the snare? Why would you listen? You know, and I said all that knowing that, you know, the Beatles recorded with overhead mics and a
And-
microphone under the
Yeah.
snare.
Underneath, right.
But that was in the 1960s, and that's not how we get snares these days.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I'm not a big fan of under miking. I mean, if I have to do it, I'll do it, but I find that it's a lot harder to get right. Like the mic positioning is it doesn't, like, you have to really get it in the right spot or it doesn't sound right to me. And I've only had luck with a couple of different microphones. I think like the KSM 137 from Shure was the only thing for me that ever worked, and I had to put it in just the right place to do it. I think it was like, it had to be like a drumstick away, and it had to be
Oh, wow.
between the halfway between the outside edge of the cymbal and the bell. I think that was where I liked it the most. It was a drumstick, or it was too. I used to measure it. Like I had a way of measuring it that I had figured out. It was like, this is where it works. But I still never really was crazy about that. And you don't get the stick attack from it the same. So it's a little washier. And for the modern worship stuff right now, part of the issue I have with cymbals is stuff gets really washy, and it's really hard to get the accents. If somebody is actually crashing on a cymbal, that's a conversation I have with drummers a lot of the time. Is, you know, they're doing the crash ride thing, which hasn't gone away in spite of me wishing and praying for.
We're all praying for that, Dave.
For a long time. You know, the crash ride, if people don't hit their crashes harder than the crash ride, all those crashes get lost.
Yeah.
So under miking makes it even harder to kind of dig out those accents, I think. So I like having them on top, the microphones anyways.